We're going to talk about Furiosa. Chris and I have seen it. If you watched last week's Hollywood on the Rocks, you saw a review of it. We're going to go into spoiler reviews on Friday and include your comments, as most of you hopefully will have seen it. But the topic of today is the end of the girl boss. And after watching Furiosa, we came to the conclusion that that maybe the girl boss, maybe people are figuring out the problem with the girl boss, and that maybe Furiosa is the solution, and that we're finally seeing a female character who is rightfully representative as that strong female character. So the question I have for you, Derek, is how did we get here? Where did this idea of the girl boss come from? How do you define girl boss?
That's a good question. I would say the first step, we saw great female protagonists that were also tough and, action oriented with obviously the main two that come to mind where everybody will say is, Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor. And I think everybody tried to shortcut those two characters and just go straight to girl boss mode. But you remember, like the most, I talk to people about this all the time. The most iconic versions of those two characters are in the sequels. All right, they're in the two sequels, Aliens and Terminator 2. Those are the ones that everybody kind of remembers. But they started out in earlier films and they were brought in for the sequels. Okay, so in Alien, Sigourney Weaver's Ellen Ripley, she's fine. I'm not saying she's not a good character, but she's kind of like plays the last girl. She's surviving. She's not on the attack. She's not trying to, she's more or less in survival mode for most of that as the alien is walking around the spaceship picking off her and all of her peoples. And then she comes to life at the end and, kind of, gets herself right. And then the same thing with Sarah Connor, the first Terminator, she's more or less a damsel in distress. And now in Terminator 2, she's taking up, the gun. She's got to protect John Connor. She's got to make sure he survives, So there was a version of these two characters that weren't the girl bosses. You know what I mean? And they had to build into that. So we got to see them vulnerable. We got to see them in like not a tough, state. We got to see them more or less vulnerable. And nevertheless, even with all that being said, they still retained their femininity, in the second films. They retained who they were as women. Sigourney Weaver, especially as Ellen Ripley, the mother, kind of arc, the arc that she went on was more of a mother's arc because of what happened to her when she was in cryosleep. I'm not going to go into that, but we saw her as a woman and she was still feminine. She's flirting with Hicks, she's doing all of that kind of stuff. And the same thing with Sarah Connor, she had to, take on more of a motherly mantle as well to protect John. Again, we get the feminine qualities of these folks without seeing them just being like total butch babe, like Vasquez and Aliens, with the shaved head and the bandana and all of that kind of crap. Like that's how a modern audience or a modern writer would have wrote Ripley in the second film. They would have just had her go straight to Vasquez mode, instead of actually, showing her growth as a woman. So I think that's where it started. They tried to shortcut all of that, the actual story and the character development of those two characters. And let's just go straight to, hardcore female protagonists. Don't take no lip from no man. You don't have to do that. And then a lot of feminism that's come along the way, over the past 20 years or whatever has led into this girl boss era. And I think that's the biggest problem is that, they're taking away, a woman's femininity. We're all in this world, men, women, we understand each other on a certain level. And, if you try to go against the grain with that and you try to give us a character that's not really a woman, she's kind of like a guy. It's like the character's literally a guy with a wig and boobs, like that's really what they're giving us in a lot of these girl boss characters. When you do that, you lose the audience, you lose your audience. You lose people.
You also destroy storytelling. I'll give you an example. I think the first time we talked about this, that this idea of the girl boss came about was Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is interesting because it's right in the middle of Infinity War and Endgame, where Marvel at this point could do no wrong, and then Captain Marvel comes out kind of as a response to Wonder Woman from DC. But But Captain Marvel did very well at the box office. It just flew like gangbusters, and I believe a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was riding on this wave that Marvel and the MCU had built up into this point in time.
Sure.
But the problem with Captain Marvel, and I think a lot of us realized it, down the road, was the fact that she was a character basically who had no fatal flaw, which is fundamental in good storytelling. You need a character who has a weakness, and where
Yeah.
the antagonist exploits that weakness, and that the protagonist now has to overcome that weakness in order to defeat the antagonist, and that represents everyone, because we in life we are imperfect people. We encounter obstacles constantly in life, and it is our ability to overcome these obstacles, this adversity in life, that makes us a better and stronger human being over time. But the problem was with Captain Marvel is she was perfect.
Yep.
She had no fatal flaw. She had no imperfection, and what the antagonist did was it veiled her eyes from her true potential. So it's a woman who had potential, but was having
Yeah.
her potential suppressed, and then by the end, when the veil was lifted, she became who she was. So she never really grew throughout the entire
Yeah.
thing,
There's no
and
growth.
yeah, and we could go into the feminism aspect of that in terms of, that she don't need no man to help her out. No, she had it all along. And but but I think that's where you saw the flaw in the way women were being written, especially as lead characters, and that this idea of the girl boss carries itself throughout. And I would also speak to supporting characters now, that you have the male with the who needs help, and then the female who comes along who knows everything. Can shoot a gun perfectly, knows how to strike a man in the right spot to subdue him,
Oh yeah.
and
Uh,
and it's like,
you remember
oh, go ahead.
Ray
Mhm.
from The Force Awakens
Yeah, I
going on to
remember
Han
her.
Solo's ship and telling Han Solo, "Oh, this is what's what," and she's running the show there, and I was like, "How are you coming in and telling
I
Han Solo
bypassed the
about his
compressor.
ship?" Right? Yeah, I bypassed the compressor. Why didn't you do that, Han? It's like, come on, guys. And again, that's what it is. They're skipping steps. They're not giving us the
Hmm.
opportunity to watch these characters develop, watch these women, develop into who they became or whatever. We're just supposed to accept it. We don't accept that from male characters either. Those are boring characters when you don't see
Yeah,
development. They're
yeah,
just a
yeah.
tough,
There's no boy
yeah,
boss. I mean,
right.
well, there are
Well, there
boy
are, but
bosses,
they're
but they run into the same problem from a storytelling standpoint.
exactly.
I think look, people are gonna crap on me for this one, but I'll say it. I think the worst boy boss is Superman. Superman is perfect.
Mm.
He has superpower. In fact, they had to invent a weakness. They had to, ironically, his kryptonite was kryptonite. Uh, you know, and that was the problem DC had. That if you've heard stories of Stan Lee, it was just the fact that Superman was perfect. The superheroes in DC early on were just super. They were perfect. They were heroic.
They're
They
gods.
yeah, they were gods, and they busted it and they did it. And so what Stan did with Marvel was to take characters that had a flaw, and then the power wasn't necessarily a gift, but it was also a
Yeah,
burden. For
they're
example, the
cursed.
Hulk.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Hulk became the Hulk because of his anger and his rage. That's the imperfect character. Spider-Man was a high school teenager who became a superhero, but had to hide the fact that he was the whole alter ego, and then the whole death of his uncle. There are little nuances here that are brought into these characters that make them imperfect, and that allows us, because we are imperfect people, to relate to those characters, and why it's so difficult to relate to Superman or relate to Captain Marvel.
well, what you got to do in those characters is you got to give Superman a problem that his muscles cannot solve. You got to give him
Hmm.
stuff to do that's going to really challenge, even though you have this godlike being, like, okay, but are you smarter than Brainiac? Can you outwit these more intelligent characters? You can't just punch your way through this. And
Mhm.
that's what they have to do with some of these girl bosses. It's like they have these girl bosses, they have no flaws. Okay, the flaw ends up being themselves, like you were saying. Same thing was with Ray. Oh, the power was in you all along. You just had to discover it. It was men that were
Yeah.
holding you back. Like that kind of nonsense is. I mean, that's the reason why the girl boss film and the idea behind it just doesn't hit with people. Because a lot of people they'll see this amazing female character on screen, and well, how's she ever gonna lose? Like she just everything's just handed to her, and that's just the most boring inference of a character I've ever heard of. It's nothing that's relatable because, like you said, we all have, problems that we deal with on a day to day basis. And when we watch a story or read a story or watch a television program, we want to see how these characters are going to navigate through their problems to get to what it is that they want to achieve. Usually, like you were saying about, the protagonist, usually he has a flaw, and that flaw is directly related to a need that he hasn't dealt with or he needs to deal with. And once he finally overcomes the flaw, then he can see his way through to getting accomplishing what it is that he needs to accomplish. It's like literally, not a perfect example, but Indiana Jones
Mhm.
had to go through the well of the souls to find the Ark of the Covenant, right? He wants the Ark of the
Mhm.
Covenant, but he's got to face his fear of snakes. All right. And that was the fear that would have held him back normally, but he sees a greater goal and he has to fight his way through that. In that little microcosm, that's kind of what all characters need to do. They need to face their fears, overcome those fears, and then move on to the next thing. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, they don't do that with girl bosses. Girl bosses are just awesome. They're just awesome with a capital A right off rip. And there's nothing that can take them down. And the only thing that's going to stop them is, some man, usually a man. It's rare that you see a female antagonist in these situations because they don't want a woman to look bad. So it's all right. Well, we got to have a male antagonist. I was actually surprised that the Marvels put a female villain in there. But then they even made her kind of sympathetic. So then you get these sympathetic villains. And
Yeah.
it's just trash, man. It's
Villains are
just,
not villains. Yeah.
yeah, they're not villains
Especially
anymore,
female villains.
So yeah, I mean,
So
and
let me
it's
let
always done at the expense of male characters. They'll do this stuff and then they'll make the men around them stupid, incompetent, or whatever. And it's like, come on, like who wants to watch that?
yeah.
Especially if you're putting this in an action setting with an adventure film or a comic book film or sci-fi, where it's primarily guys watching it anyway. You know, I don't get it. I don't
Yeah.
understand why they went down that road. It's not. It doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, it's finally coming to an end. Thank goodness.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is the fact that just by having this discussion,
Mm-hmm.
we are potentially setting ourselves up to become viral and to have people just basically say, well, Derek and Alan, they're misogynists because they don't want to see a strong woman on screen. And and it's the I mean, how do you yeah, well, I mean, what do you think about that idea of what made it so that we can't even talk about it, or that we shouldn't even be talking about this subject?
Well, because you're speaking against what is currently out there as the message. The message is that girls get it done and they can do everything a man can do in high heels and all that crap. And it's not true. I mean, I'm not saying that, some women out there can't achieve what it is that they want to achieve, but men and women are fundamentally different. And to try to paint this picture that they're exactly the same is one of the major issues that's going on right now, just in society at large. It's like we have lived experiences, folks. I don't know if Hollywood is aware of this, but we walk amongst normal people out here. All right. We're not walking around Hollywood's
Hmm.
bubble where everybody thinks the same way. No, we have real lived experiences where we come across women and we come across men and we know what life is really like. And you guys are trying to push us all in a box to say you need to believe this way, but the world doesn't react that way. Especially doesn't react that way outside of this country. You go to other countries, they're like, "What is this? This doesn't make any sense to me." This is insane. But in this country, we try to I don't know, put a nice appealing look on this whole concept that women are just as capable of men of doing a lot of different things. Almost just they're
Yeah.
the exact same. And there's some things that women can do. I'm not saying that there isn't. Obviously,
Well,
there's
I
some
mean,
things that
yeah,
women can do and men and everything. And there's a lot of equality when it comes to that. But what they try to portray in films a lot of times, it's just like, come on, guys. Have like a
yeah,
a 5'1" 105-pound woman just kicking some guy's ass. It's like, yo, you really expect me to believe this? I don't care how
Yeah,
much
we'll get to
training she got.
Furiosa in a moment.
Oh, okay. That's what I see. I haven't watched
But
Furiosa, so I don't know if that's what's happening. But
yeah,
you,
well, we'll
that's a
talk about
big
that.
issue.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in a moment. But for me, the problem I have with this discourse that we're on is the idea that there are differences between men and women.
Right.
I'm Common sense tells us that. Science tells us that. Centuries of psychology and biology and anatomy have told us that there are differences between men and women, and the idea that one is better than the other or vice versa goes against the fact that maybe there's a grander design that said maybe these differences were meant to be complementary of one another, that they were meant to
Right.
work together rather than us being the same person at the same time. um,
But what do they push?
we
They
we
don't
should
push
be
the
celebrating our differences. That's the
like
thing.
going back to Ripley and her mothering instincts when it came to that film and with her relationship with Newt and going to save her at the end and everything that was happening in that film. Again, it comes off differently. These are the values that they don't want people, I guess, to focus on when it comes to women. It's like, yo, this motherly instinct is very important. It's valuable in society. It's not something to just wash away. Oh, it's not important. It's important that she can kick the alien queen's ass. That's important. But it's like, but being a mother to Newt is just as important. In a lot of places, even more important. Not every little girl is going to run into the alien
Mhm.
queen trying to kill her and lay eggs in her mouth, but every little girl needs a mom. And so it's like, why are we trying to push away this idea that this motherly, like, but that's what we're seeing around now with this girl boss stuff.
Mhm.
And a lot of women out there is, I don't need to have a husband. I don't need a family and kids and all that. But then, like, 9 times out of 10, towards the end of their lives, they're all like, man, I wish I had a kid. Or I wish I had a family
Yeah.
or this or that. They have that instinct that's in them. And that's been built up through, again, millennia of society living a certain way. And now everybody just wants to go against the grain. And I'm like, I don't get it. Okay, there's a way that the world has been built with society. Societies are built from families, and civilizations are built from. It's like this is the way the human race works. This is the way humanity works. And as
Mhm.
long as you push against that, and you try to go in a completely different direction, this is what's going to happen. You're going to
Yeah.
have failures. I mean, we saw how many girl boss failures lately. With Madam Web and what was the other one? Marvel. The Marvels failed. You had Birds of Prey, all in the comic book genre. All of them failed. Failed. Why? Because they're not good movies. First of all, they weren't written well. But they tried to push this agenda, and I think people are just turned off from them. They're not even going to give it a chance at this point. It's like, I'm
Yeah.
good. I'm good. Okay.
Yeah. By the way, I want to say thank you to all the 3,300 people watching us on YouTube and X and Rumble. I appreciate you being here. Um, let me Okay, and then yeah, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification, all that other stuff. Lick the like button.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Do that.
here's the other thing is that has bothered me is this idea of toxic masculinity. There are certain traits of men that have been deemed toxic, but at the same time, the new modern strong woman, they're portraying these aspects of toxic masculinity, but for some reason it's not toxic when females do it. It just seems like that the new strong woman is are they exhibit traits that you would associate with men, which I find ironic.
Yeah. Well, again, that's why you see it in the films where I said you have this female character that doesn't exude any femininity at all. It's all masculinity. So it's like, we have these masculine women characters, but they're just men. They're not women. If you had a girl, like I say, if you have a movie or a story with a character and she's the lead protagonist, but she is a woman and she comes off as a woman, it can work. All right. You don't even what was the one with Julia Roberts? Why am I drawing a blank on that? Where she's the
Which
lawyer, or she's oh god,
oh
not a lawyer. But she's Erin Brockovich.
oh,
Okay,
that's
Erin
right, yeah.
Brockovich. She's a girl boss in that. All right, not the girl boss of today, but the girl boss of then. She takes charge. She's in control, and she's totally feminine. She's a woman, and she looks and acts like a woman. But she's also, a boss. I don't think she was a real lawyer. I think she kind of learned law or whatever. I can't remember the exact details, but She walks in and she takes care of business in every scene, and and we all love that movie. That movie's a great movie. But why does that work and all of this other crap doesn't? It's because it's realistic, and she's a woman, and she's not, trying to usurp a man. She's trying to come in and say, hey, this is the truth of this situation, and I'm bringing it to the table. And we just look at it as, hey, this is a great character. This is a
Yeah.
great character. It's on a mission. And again, she embraced her femininity, and she used it to her advantage in that film, and it was awesome.
Well,
So
also
why
helps
can't we
that
get that?
it also helps that Aaron Brockovich was a real person. And
And
that's
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 but that part is still, I mean, but still, if they were writing Erin Brockovich today, they would probably have her as a ski bald head woman, wearing business suits everywhere, and there would have been any femininity. Julia Roberts still was able to bring out some feminine qualities. That's what I mean. It's the feminine versus this masculine, like the girls are exuding this toxic masculinity, like you said, and it's just kind of like I don't know why they make these choices. Show us women as they are, not as what you may want them to be.
Yeah.
And then we'll
Well, and
rock
that's the thing that goes back to woke, the basic definition of woke. It's this idea that we are defined by our oppression, and that we need to identify these microaggressions and these impressions in our oppressors. And so for women, it's men do this, men do that. These are microaggressions for men, and we can't find the nuance about it. We can't have a discussion about it. The idea
Yeah.
that men and women are different, we can't have that discussion today. And that's the biggest problem, because once you start having that discussion, I think you feel like that you're giving up ground on what feminism had brought us to this point. And 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 that's why you have to hold fast to certain things, and you can't recognize the nuance.